This is FIS on the 5-minute time frame. I'm going to show you the channel we're in for Monday. We ended the week at $54.74, down nearly 1%. This is where we are. To the north side takes us to a gap fill that begins at $54.82, closes out at 2 standard deviations and resistance, $55.22. 3 standard deviations is roughly $55.51. And 4 standard deviations and another level of resistance is $55.79. Back to the middle of the trend, and in this case, support is $54.65. Negative 2 standard deviations and another level of support is $54.10, $53.82, and at negative 4 standard deviations, $53.54. This is support, support, support. Anytime we hit this line, I anticipate a bounce to the upside. And if we are down here, this line is resistance. I expect a stock to go sideways as people try to figure out whether they want to go long or short. And this is another level of resistance, a take profit area, another take profit area, and another take profit area. Anytime we hit these lines, I anticipate a sell-off as people take their profits and they run. But if we are down here and we get up to this level, this is also a point where a lot of people like to bail out and take their profits. The RSI right now is at 45. And I want to show you a few other stocks that have gaps either to the upside or to the downside or are at negative 2 standard deviations. O is another one with a gap to the upside that closes out at 57.93. AIG is at negative 2 standard deviations. I will anticipate a bounce right along here. We could eventually go back down to another level of support and another level of support, but it will go up a little bit as people buy the dip. TRV, the Travelers Companies, is at almost negative 2.5 standard deviations. If we make it to this line, I will anticipate a bounce as well, and maybe grinding it out along this line. This is Ross Stores. I've talked about this in the past. There's a gap to the downside that closes out at 113.39, and 2 standard deviations takes us to 122.59. The 1-year price target is 129.45, which represents an 8% return from where we are right now. The next one is YUM Brands. Below negative 2 standard deviations, I expect some grinding around here, but if we dip down to negative 3 standard deviations again, I'll anticipate a bounce. I do own YUMC, and I bought some for my mom, and that one's doing okay. It's been all over the map, but right now it's kind of leveled off. The next one is AMD. We are at 102.25, and there is a gap that fills out at 111.32, and negative 2 standard deviations is 96.75. Anytime we get into this area here at negative 2 and 2 standard deviations, this is a buy zone and a sell zone. And if you want to play very conservatively, you can play to the middle of this road. If you're down here, just sell along this line. That's one way to do it as well. Sofi, I do own this. There's a gap that begins at 857, closes out at 872. There's a smaller gap within this gap, but if we fill here, this gap will close out. Ignore the blue lines. That is previous support and resistance. Negative 2 standard deviations, the middle of the trend, and 2 standard deviations. And I marked that out for myself at night, and then I just delete it, but I kept that just for my own reference. And -2 standard deviations takes us to 804. The next one is Penn Entertainment. It's got a gap that fills to the south side at 2305. Valero Energy, ticker symbol VLO, has a gap that fills to the upside at 136.39, basically at 3 standard deviations. And this gap already filled to the upside at 130.79. The 1-year price target is 147.38, represents a 10% increase. The next one is Devon Energy. There's a gap that closes out at 48.94. -2 standard deviations takes us to 48.61. And 2 standard deviations takes us to 50.86. The 1-year price target is 60.46. ADSK is the next one. We've got a gap that takes us down to 204.52. And I believe this line was an old price target maybe, or I'm not sure why I marked that out. The 1-year price target on ADSK is 235.21, which represents an 8% return on your money. And finally, Tesla. We've got a gap that takes Tesla down all the way to $216.02. We are not in this channel yet, but something to be aware of. This gap closed to the downside at 232.32. This one closed to the upside at 219.06. And Tesla is a very gappy stock, as you can see here. All right, that does it for me. Thank you so much for watching.